Hello, and good to have you here with us for another City Daily. And I am joined by Natalie Williams. Great to have you, Natalie. Thanks so much for being here with us.
Thanks for having me.
If you don't know Natalie, she's a former journalist. She currently works for Jubilee Plus in Kings Church Hastings, which with the coolest Twitter handle, you know, with the 1066 on the end. And as a former history teacher, I always love that. Natalie is a speaker. She is an author. And Natalie, we were just talking about the third book that was due to come out this month, but just tell us when it is coming out and the delay and what's happening with that.
Yeah, so Martin and I worked on a new book called A Call to Act, and it was supposed to come out in June. But because of everything going on around us, the publisher wanted to delay, and so we've pushed it back to September. But the good thing about that is it's given us a chance to add a whole chapter on coronavirus, and particularly on the impact of coronavirus on the poorest. So yeah, now it'll be out. It's still available to pre-order, but it'll be out in September. We're looking forward to that.
That's great. And for those who don't know anything about Jubilee Plus, Natalie, could you just explain to people what it is and how people can get involved and hear about it? And yeah, just tell us a bit more about Jubilee Plus.
Yeah, sure. So Jubilee Plus is a UK charity that our main aim is to equip churches all around the country to be really effective in the way they support and lift people out of poverty in their communities. It's something that each one of us on the team is passionate about. You know, I know most of you guys know Pete and Sue Linden on our team, so you'll know that already. But yeah, we basically help churches, and kind of before lockdown, we helped by going to churches. Martin Charlesworth and I have come to you guys and go around to many churches around the country, but also inviting you to come to our networking days or our conferences or things like that. Obviously, we can't do that at the moment. So at the moment, we are predominantly operating online. We have weekly Zooms on all sorts of issues, from mental health to how to run a food bank during the pandemic, all sorts of things like that. And we're putting out videos on a regular basis as well. So we're still very much active, still doing our best to equip churches and support what you guys are doing in your local community, really, to help the disadvantaged, the vulnerable, the marginalised.
That's great. We've absolutely loved having you and Martin come and visit us at City Church, and I know how many people greatly appreciated the conference last year that you guys put on. It was in Bristol, so there really wasn't any excuse for people to come along to, but it was just wonderful. It was the first one that I'd been to, and both the main talks and the seminars, so prophetic, actually, in terms of what had been talked about. I went to a seminar by Ben Lindsay on youth violence, and you just think at this time, at this season, what he was talking about, so apt for us right now. But if you weren't here when Natalie came to speak at City Church, she came to speak particularly about mercy, and just know how kind of important that was for us as a church to hear that and to respond to that, and to some of the things that have launched out of that. We've launched a monthly encounter meeting where we've invited people off the streets and those who are in vulnerable situations to come and eat, experience God, build community. And I think Natalie, you may not have been aware of that, but I think Martin and yourself coming along were definitely part of that story of kind of kick-starting some of those things. So we just want to say thank you so much for playing your part in that.
That's so encouraging. You know, that's the thing, is obviously when we go and visit churches, when you hear about what happens as a result, or even just how you've encouraged or spurred a church on, it's great. And so thank you for encouraging me by telling me that, because I didn't know that, and that's really wonderful.
That's great. I just wondered whether, just to help people get to know you a little bit more, but also just perhaps share some of your experiences during lockdown and what it's like been for you. How has it been for you? Quarantine and dealing with some of the stuff and some of the thought processes, particularly, I guess, in line with what you do, but just you as a human being. How have you responded?
Yeah. Okay, so for me personally, I live on my own, and I'll admit, when I heard we were likely to go into lockdown, I think my primary kind of concern for myself personally was about my mental health. I think I know that too much time on my own doesn't do me good. I know that I need family and community and friendship, and actually I've got so many incredible friends who feed me on a regular basis. There's a kind of running joke that I'll never turn down a meal anywhere. I managed to go 46 days in a row last year not feeding myself but being fed by other people. And so, to be honest, although that kind of sounds little bit ridiculous, one of my biggest kind of concerns was, how am I going to feed myself, in terms of not, I'm very privileged that I can afford food, so it wasn't about that, but it was about not knowing how to cook, and suddenly going from maybe cooking for myself one night a week to every night of the week. And so I think cooking and my mental health were the things that I was particularly worried about. I lost a fifth of my income pretty much straight away. Like, one of my jobs basically stopped, not Jubilee Plus, a different job that I was working on, stopped straight away, and became obvious it wouldn't be possible. And I think there's a whole load of things that, as I've reflected, I could have been very upset about. I think the lower income, the possible isolation, the knowing that my mental health might struggle. But actually, I've found it to be just an incredible season for me of real growth, which has been a real shock, if I'm honest. I've found that actually my personal relationship with Jesus has strengthened, but not just that. I've had quite a lot of opportunities to be stretched in character and gifting during this season. And those have not been fun particularly, but they have been, I am appreciating them because I know I'm being stretched, I know I'm growing. And a lot of that's coming through my local work. So at Kings Church, we run 8 or 9 social action projects. The biggest one is Hastings Food Bank. And that has just been so incredibly busy. I stepped into a new role at Kings actually on the 1st of April, which was expected prior to the pandemic, but has felt very timely, just overseeing all of our social action, but also we're building a community action hub. It's just been a very, very busy time. And in some ways, I've ended up with almost for me personally, the perfect combination of being able to go into the office twice a week to help with Food Bank, kind of as a frontline service, as it were, but also being able to work from home. And I think the longer it's gone on, the more and more I've just been aware of how privileged I am. The fact that I've got a strong enough internet connection to have this call, for example. The fact that I only lost a fifth of my income and not the whole of my income. The fact that I can afford food, and I discovered in my freezer, buried deep under ice cream, there were some vegetables. And so I cooked them. It was like this amazing thing where I thought, oh, look, I can cook healthy food for myself. It doesn't all have to be macaroni cheese out of a tin, as much as I love that. So actually, I found that there's a lot that could have troubled me, could have caused me a great deal of anxiety, but actually in everything I was worried about, there's been an opportunity to find something to be thankful for and to recognise my privilege. And I guess when you're working in something like the food bank, you're seeing so many people whose lives are so devastated by the pandemic and devastated by lockdown, and who, if you said to them this is an opportunity to grow and learn, would look at you like you were crazy, because for them it's actually just devastating and catastrophic. So that obviously makes me incredibly grateful for not only the privilege I have, but also the opportunity to help contribute to making other people's lives easier and better at this time as well. So it's quite a long answer.
No, I mean it's great. It's so helpful both to hear what's going on in your life, and I imagine a lot of people will relate to that. I think and connect with that story and that reality of what it means to be on your own, and also just conflicting perspectives. Some people have seen it as an opportunity to suddenly do a whole load of stuff because suddenly they've got a load of free time. I see that side of things, and then there are other side where it's like you're either even busier than normal, or just the challenges of life are so overwhelming and all-consuming that it's very difficult to connect with the other side. For me personally, I'm oscillating between the two. There are times where it does feel, a bit more relaxed, and also then there's the reality of some of the challenges that we're facing. My wife's a nurse at the hospital in Bristol, and she's on the ICU ward. So she's seeing some horrific situations and sharing those stories and dealing with that stuff. And so again, we are in a privileged, we're in a privileged position, like you said, internet, being able to watch TV, get out and about. We've got a car. So I think, it's just really helpful to hear from someone else and their experience. I wonder, Natalie, if you could just, and you've talked about adding another chapter to the book, and obviously we don't want to give too many spoilers because we want people to buy the book. But could you just speak into a little bit of the effects of coronavirus and the pandemic on different sections of society? Because I think some people will say, well, of course it will affect particularly those who are disadvantaged or experiencing poverty. But could you just perhaps just pull the curtain back a little bit and just explain some of those effects on that particular group?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the impact on the poorest, I guess, has been the primary concern of me and Jubilee Plus during this time, because, it's even things like if you're in a 2-bedroom flat with 3 kids as a single parent, and you're supposed to homeschool them, and you've got a job that you're supposed to be doing, and you suddenly have lost your childcare because maybe your mum, their grandmum, whatever, or grandfather used to babysit, and now they can't because they're over 70 and they're vulnerable, and so you've lost that sort of support. Even for people who are working actually in the NHS, who might have no recourse to public funds, and are trying to still work because it's the only way that they can pay their rent and pay their bills. I think for people who are living just on the edge with no savings, and that their monthly income was only just enough to pay their bills and food and so on, to suddenly lose 20% if you've been furloughed and your employer can't add on the 20% to make it up to your full salary. That for some people is pretty devastating, actually. Yeah. And I think there's a danger for many of us, if we are comfortable, we don't even have to be wealthy, but just to be comfortable, where we might think, well, most people have got 1,000 or 2,000 or more in the bank to lean on in a rainy day. And actually that just isn't the reality for so many people. I think just the impact of no longer being able to get free school meals, we've seen that here quite a lot on the impact on families, just that extra burden of food costing that bit more. In fact, even just the fact I've got friends who are pretty comfortable, but say the rate at which their teenage sons are getting through food is just costing them a lot more than it did before. I think in terms of people who are stuck in violent homes, for whom the words stay at home to stay safe just don't compute. And there's no way out at the moment because they can't, where can you go if you're not free to go anywhere, if you can't go and sofa surf with your friends or family? And refuge places are limited because obviously of the danger of someone coming in with COVID-19 and spreading it throughout the refuge. So I think there's been, this is horrifying, but there's been quite a significant online spike in child sexual abuse online materials being spread. It's just, you just think for some people being at home right now is the least safe option for them, with no way out. So that's not necessarily about poverty, that's about vulnerability. But I think also just in terms of just being aware of the impact it's having on Black and minority ethnic people as well. And statistically, if you are Black and minority ethnic, or if you're living in a deprived area, you are at least twice as likely to die of COVID-19 as your more affluent white counterparts. So I think it's the risk element, it's the ability to self-isolate, which many of us take for granted, that we can stay in our households. I think, it's the loneliness of people who live on their own, and that'd be the elderly, but it's not just the elderly. It's, I know people my age who just, who've had COVID, had to stay at home, but also just have no way really to get out. And obviously lockdowns ease now, so we'll see some of that easing. But I think there's any number of pressures. I think there are people who are on 0-hour contracts who are worried about whether they're ever going to go back to work. I spoke to someone yesterday who's got 3 jobs, and she said to me, there's no way all 3 of those jobs are going to survive this, because they're all in the kind of leisure and tourism industry. So she's like, there's no way I'm going to have 3 jobs to make ends meet after this. I mean, for some of us, even the concept of having to have 3 jobs to make ends meet doesn't sound like the best of circumstances. For her, she's like, I really hope all 3 would come back so I can have my full income again. So I think, you know, the impact on the vulnerable, on the poorest is massive. And I think probably something that is still being underestimated, even though there are headlines about it. I think also as we come out of lockdown increasingly, we're going to see the longer term impact. You know, I'm in a seaside town. A third of our adult workforce has jobs in leisure and tourism. So if the seaside economy doesn't recover or doesn't get a proper summer, that actually will see businesses closed. It will see people unemployed. It will see bigger problems in an already deprived area. So I think there's, I mean, whether you talk about employment, whether you talk about schooling, whether you talk about healthcare, whether you talk about food poverty, whether you talk about debt, to be honest, whether you talk about mental health, ethnicity, actually, there are people who are suffering. And like I said, for whom this is actually devastating. And for most of us, it's inconvenient. And I can certainly, you know, get into a negative mindset of how this is impacting me and forget that actually really it's only disrupting my comfort, whereas for others it is catastrophic and they don't know how they'll recover from it. So I think it's pretty bleak the more you look at it as well, to be honest.
It is, and probably to some extent we're living in a bit of a false reality at the moment, aren't we? Because of what the government to some extent have been able to provide in terms of, you know, furlough schemes and topping up, and obviously not everyone has been able to access that, but it feels a little bit like we're living in this world where we're not really aware of what's potentially around the corner for many people.
And I think one of the things that's, you know, in one sense probably disturbing to all of us is the unknown, and the fact that there's so many things put out there as if they're fact. This will happen or that will happen, or, you know, whereas actually we don't know. We just don't know, and no one knows except God. You know, like politicians don't know, journalists don't know, even scientists actually don't necessarily know, although they might be more informed than the rest of us. But there's so much that is uncertain and unknown that's making it difficult to plan for the way forward. But I think it really, really is fundamentally important that churches in particular are planning for the way forward as best as we can with the information in our hands right now.
Yeah, that's right. Just thinking about churches particularly, what have been some of the ways in which you guys as a church have been able to kind of step up and support people? What have you seen? How do you think we could best support people at this time who are particularly in a vulnerable position?
Yeah, well, every one of our projects has had to adapt, obviously. So we do education coaching for children, primary school children at risk of exclusion. Obviously, we can't go into schools and meet with them anymore. We run Baby Basics to help pregnant women who are incredibly vulnerable. I mentioned our food bank already. You know, like I said, we've got 8 or 9 projects. All of them have adapted so that they can still operate in some way. I mean, obviously, some of them are much quieter than they were before. Some of them are much busier. So our food bank in April saw a 167% increase on last April. And we were already one of the busiest food banks in the country for population size. We'd had 3 years where it's been incredibly busy since Universal Credit came to Hastings because of the 5-week wait in particular. And so we were already really busy. We've totally changed the way we do things. We've gone from collection only in 2 sessions a week to delivery only 5 days a week. We've ramped up massively. I think one of the ways that actually I've been really pleased to see this unfold for us as a local church has been, we've invested a lot in relationships with local decision makers over the last few years, and recognising that we don't have a monopoly on good works. We're not the only ones who want to see people lifted out of poverty, and there's opportunities for us to bless what others are doing in the community and to support it and to come alongside and to plug some gaps and that sort of thing. So King's Church was invited to become part of the Hastings Community Hub, which was set up very quickly by the council, our clinical commissioning group, our county council, Hastings Voluntary Action. It's got all these kind of statutory agencies on it, and then a few voluntary agencies too. And we were invited to be part of that, which has been brilliant, to just really work in partnership with others and play our part in helping our town get through this difficult season. And as part of that, I was then asked to chair the Hastings Emergency Food Response Group. So I've been chairing that, I guess, probably for about 8 weeks or so, which has brought together everyone who's trying to get food to those who need it during this time, and means we're working much more collaboratively. We're just, I guess, having that opportunity to say that we are here to be part of a safety net for the most vulnerable in the town, and we will work with the council, and we will work with the healthcare in our locality. We don't just want to be in isolation doing our own thing. We want to support what others are doing, and like I say, plug some of the gaps. And that's just been, I think, really good, and something that I'm personally really passionate about. Church is doing both, doing the frontline, hands on the ground, kind of helping people who are in crisis, but also being at the table with decision makers and helping to make some of the decisions that then have a direct impact on those people who are struggling. It's kind of both sides of it. So you're getting to change some of the system and support people in crisis. But obviously changing some of the system hopefully means fewer people will be in crisis as you progress. So for us, that's been a key part of this season. But I think obviously the priority has just been getting food and toiletries to people who otherwise wouldn't be able to get hold of them at this time. That's been our focus. That's been what we've been doing, and we've seen the need increase on a massive scale. I think one thing we've seen that surprised me is we've seen people turning to our food bank who have never been in poverty before. Wow. So that's been one of the things that I think this crisis has caused to happen that we haven't seen before. We're used to seeing people who are always just about managing, or always just dipping in and out of poverty, or always in poverty. We're not used to seeing huge numbers of people coming to us saying, I've never been in need. I have never imagined I would need a food bank. And you see on their faces, when we were still seeing people face to face, just this shell shock that they found themselves in this situation, that this is something that happens to other people. It's not something that happens to me. And I think that's going to be part of the legacy of coronavirus, actually, is there are going to be people who've never experienced hardship or poverty who suddenly find themselves in it and almost don't have the skills to navigate it because they're unfamiliar with it. And I think that's somewhere where as churches we need to be prepared to help those people, as well as those who are in long-term poverty or who are more familiar with it and perhaps have just got used to it, and so therefore have learned how to deal with it, and learn a degree of resilience, which they shouldn't have had to. But like I say, there'll be some now who just don't have that because they haven't had to have it before. So that's been part of this for me. That's been a bit of a revelation, to be honest.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, you said, God knows, and he sees, and he's working even in the most kind of dire situations. You shared a story earlier of just some great stories of hope, but I just wondered whether there were any glimmers of hope or stories that you could share for us in which you've experienced, or you've just seen God's hand in people's lives in a way that perhaps took you by surprise or was unexpected.
Yeah, I mean, there are absolutely glimmers of hope. I think more than glimmers. Ultimately, one of the things I've been reflecting on during this season is that Jesus isn't wobbled or toppled from his throne during this time. And, we serve a God who loves people, who's made everyone in his image, and wants us as Christians to be reaching out to lift people out of poverty, not just to give a crisis support, as important as that is, but to lift people out of poverty. And I think one of the encouraging to me is seeing that the church isn't shrinking back at this time, but is stepping up. But also, yeah, as I told you before, we started this recording, we've seen people healed in our church during this time in a way that I've never personally seen in people I know before. So we've seen children healed of long-term and quite severe food allergies and dairy intolerances, and that's been amazing. And I know that will revolutionise one family in particular, for whom their 3 kids have all been healed during lockdown. But what's been amazing is I told a friend of mine who lives in Yorkshire, so miles and miles away from Hastings, about what had happened with this family. And so she decided to pray for her 10-year-old son, and then he got healed. And so he's now loving macaroni cheese and pizza and ice cream. In fact, there's a theme. All these kids who've been healed have been having ice cream for breakfast, and I feel like their parents are going to come to regret that at some point. But ice cream for breakfast seems to be a theme. But then we put that out to our church. We recorded a little interview with the family in our church and my friend in Yorkshire about this. And then on the back of that, I think we've heard of at least 3 other people who've been healed. Just through watching that video and then having faith and praying for themselves and then testing out their food allergies. And so we've got a massive rise of faith as a church, I think, to see healing of food intolerances and dairy allergies and things like that during this time. And we've had actually several emails in from people who were watching our live stream on Sunday saying, well, can you pray for my child? Can you pray for me? And we're praying with a faith level that I think I've personally certainly not had before, as in I now expect people to get healed, rather in the past I hoped they would, but you know, you kind of feel a little bit sometimes like you plead with God and you hope that he'll heal, but you know that he doesn't always, and you try and wrestle with that. Whereas now I think I'm praying for people with a sense of, well, of course they'll get healed. So yeah, it's changed. It's really exciting for us as a church to see that. And I mean, obviously our hope is that we will see people who don't know Jesus get healed as a result of that. So far, it's only been Christians, but, you know, I have faith for it to spill out. And ultimately, you know, the people that we're helping with food parcels and Moses baskets for the pregnant women, ultimately, obviously, we want them to come to know Jesus, because there's nothing better than knowing Jesus. So we want people to experience his love, his grace, his compassion, his mercy, and his kindness. That's obviously something that we are praying for, and that we want to see, not just during this time, but all times. That would be a priority for us. So yeah, there's been some real exciting things. There's been some real faith-filled things, some hope-filled things, and I think our hope is also, though, that as we move forward with whatever the legacy of coronavirus is, that in my local church, but I hope this will be the case for churches across the country, that we'll work with decision makers about the medium and the long-term plan for our communities as well, that this won't just be a discrete period in time where we've all kind of stepped up and collaborated and worked together, but actually that the church will have a seat at the table in an ongoing way and bring our contribution to what others bring, but also to be informed by the Holy Spirit. And maybe, you know, if we're Christians in the room, we can expect that God can speak to us, and that there might be a solution to a problem that no one's thought of before, and God can say it to us. And we might think it sounds obvious or silly, but this has happened to me. It's happened to friends of mine in other areas, where you sit in a room, you say the thing you think God's just said, even though you think they must have all thought of this before, and you find out no one had thought of it, and they think it's the best idea ever, and it actually helps. So, you know, I think there's a big role for Christians and churches going forward.
Yeah. That's great. I mean, I just love those stories, and just it builds faith. It builds my faith to think, do you know what? Someone could get healed. Someone can respond to the gospel in something that we're doing. Maybe even, you know, watching this.
Yeah.
You know, that their kids may suffer from food intolerances, and that they would go away and pray. And so, thanks so much for sharing that. Just before we finish, Natalie, how can we pray? How can we pray for you personally? Obviously, we want to kind of bring you to God and help pray for you. And so what are things that we could be praying for?
That's really kind of you. Thank you. I think I'd appreciate prayers. I am busier than ever and very tired at the minute. And so just, I guess, to rest well. To be honest, living on my own, I find that difficult because it's easy to work into the night and, you know, just for an absence of anything else to do, if I'm honest, because I'm used to being out with friends a lot. So I think just prayer for me personally would be that I learn in this season actually what it means to rest well and to stop, and that the world will be okay if I take a break. You know, I think a lot of us struggle to learn that, don't we? So that, for me personally, that I think for just wisdom as well, there's a lot of, I'm having to step up with increased responsibility in a lot of areas and feeling very out of my depth, but in good ways that are stretching me, but just aware that I need the wisdom of God, because left to my own devices, I don't always have it. You know, so, but for Jubilee Plus, I think particularly we'd appreciate prayers, just that for those churches that are wanting help to serve the poorest in their communities during this time and beyond, that we'll be able to help them really well, that we, you know, that I guess some of the resources we're putting out, we've just made a social action course which we're going to make available to other churches if they want to purchase that and things like that. Just that those things will be helpful and they will equip churches, and that churches that maybe are thinking we don't know how to do some of this stuff, or we don't know how to improve what we're already doing, will kind of, that we'll be able to really serve them well, I think would be a prayer request for us. Thank you.
It's a privilege and a pleasure to do that. In terms of finding out what you guys do, we will put a link to the Jubilee Plus website in the description below. But also, Natalie, where can we find the book when it comes out? Well,
I think, to be honest, you can find it now on all your usual Christian and non-Christian online sources. So you can pre-order it now, but like I say, it'll be out in September. And also, you can Jubilee Plus is on all the social media you'd expect, except TikTok, because we're not quite that cool. But, you know, we're out there, so you can connect with us in that way. Follow us. But yeah, the book, like I say, it's available now to pre-order everywhere. I don't want to name any one individual organisation, but it's everywhere you'd expect it to be. Yeah. You can get it from.
Yeah, it's a shame that the Lindens don't feature on TikTok, but there we go.
The Lindens on TikTok would be a viral sensation. I think we should work together to make that happen. Pete, in particular.
Yeah.
Pete Linden on TikTok should be the goal of our collaboration.
Yeah, I can get on board with that, so that would be great. Natalie, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Yeah, thanks very much. Take care.
Will do.